Welcome to the first part of a multi-series video where I will do my best to bring you guys along on our home build. Like many people out there, it was our dream to build our own house somewhere on a property, preferably outside of the city. You're going to watch this series and you might feel the way I felt when I watched other YouTubers show how their houses are built. I felt overwhelmed and a bit stressed out because to me it seemed like everything online was just so seamless and smooth. And let me just begin by telling you that it's not seamless or smooth or easy. And I won't be attempting to show you what's right or how you should do it or what's wrong, the best way to do it. All I wish to do is just bring you guys along, our experience, and hopefully inspire you along the way. So the project began a while ago actually in our heads. It felt eventually more realistic when we purchased a property, a beautiful prairie-like property. And soon we started catching ourselves spending time online looking at house plans on various websites. And luckily, I had also just met my now very good friend who happened to be a home designer. So we spent quite a few months together putting together a plan for our house. In summary, what we wanted was a single-story home with a walkout basement. Now, in case you're not familiar, a walkout basement, or actually, let me go back. We live in an area where basements are very common for two main reasons. One is the weather. We have the occasional tornado. And two, it's cheap square footage. You have the same footprint plus basically additional square footage underneath your house. That's one. Now the walkout functions as another benefit where if you of course have the right slope on your property, you can have access to your basement from the outside. And I'll imagine just, moving in and not having to pivot a couch around the stairs because, hey, you can just bring it in through the patio sliding door in your basement. Now, the basement would be fully planned out, but not completely finished, so that when our family grows or when the funds are available, we can finish it out, or even just a portion of it. And so here we are on a chilly spring day, staking out what would be the perimeter of the home. In hindsight, it would have been nice to use some sort of software to get a virtual idea of where to position the house. But instead, we took the old school route by simply measuring and staking as best as we could. Or at least that's what the excavation guy told me to do. Of course, there are local codes and rules that dictate some of this, but for the most part, we had quite a bit of freedom on where to place the home. Now, before we even broke ground, the weather was already delaying our project by almost a month. Eventually, on somewhat of a rainy day, the excavation guys showed up and began digging the basement based on our layout. Now, I don't know if they were just bored or it was my persistence, but they decided to ignore the rain and start digging. I will say that we had literally less than an inch of topsoil around the area. Most of this was all clay, kind of like a sandy clay depending on the depth, but definitely the kind of stuff that turns into pottery once it dries under the sun. So the guys teamed up on a backhoe and a skid steer to move the dirt as efficiently as they could. We broke ground, which the ground didn't get broken. It just means that you dig. And what they're doing is they're digging the basement out. It's a walkout basement. It's kind of hard to tell what's going on at the moment, but basically the whole situation with this property is it goes down this way and down towards me. So what they're ultimately going to have to do is the garage, which is going to be on this end, and then the other side of the house is going to have to be level. So they're building this up like that. They're also building up this sort of drive-in area, although I don't like where it's at right now, but anyway. And they're trying to level it with the driveway because everything here is lower. We might put some temporary gravel here for construction. But anyway, they're trying to level all this because the garage is going to sit on top of it. And it all has to be level with the beginning of the house on the other end, which is obviously higher in elevation. And then over here is the actual basement. So it's not very deep right now. I don't know how much deeper he's going to go than what it is right now. Obviously, he's going to have to flatten it, make it level. But it's pretty interesting because it's not actually like super deep in the ground, which I'm kind of surprised. But the challenge is you can't make this house too deep because you have a hill up there and you don't want too much drainage coming at the house. So they're trying to build it up everywhere. The next day, the sun was out and the team was back at work excavating the basement. You can see that now they're beginning to use laser levels to determine the exact depth and to also maintain pretty even ground. So this is our hole. I'm standing on the walkout edge of the basement. So basically everything behind me is flat and eventually slopes down to what will be our backyard. The side wall will begin somewhere here. Now we had to excavate the garage. It just didn't make sense to excavate the full height foundation walls and then shift to a footer on the garage side. This will all get backfilled eventually, with the garage slab being poured in the future. The basement walls will be 9 foot tall, so once they remove the forms, they will use all that loose dirt to basically backfill the foundation walls. So what you see up top there is actually going to be lower. By the way, that tiny bundle of 2x4s is for the footing forms. So let me explain how we poured our footings. We excavated slightly lower than the actual elevation of the basement, so that the footings, which are technically below the slab, would be formed right on the dirt and poured without having to trench anything. Although technically we did have to trench the footings for the walkout side, since no foundation forms were being set on them. That big PVC pipe is a sleeve for the main sewer line. You can see they were able to pour some of the footings, and they also formed some of the footings for the support beams of the house. Those are called pier pads. That's those square rebar cages you see over there. You'll also notice that they set long rebar every 24 inches or so. Those will be eventually tied together with horizontal rebar and will be reinforced for the concrete foundation walls. One important thing I haven't mentioned yet is we are putting radiant heat into the entire home. This means that the basement slab will have insulation underneath so that we don't end up using all of that nice warm radiant heat to ultimately heat the earth. However, this means that the footers need to be exposed a bit more so that the thickness of the insulation in the concrete slab would not take away too much from the height of the foundation walls. And I will definitely be going over the radiant heating in much more depth on the next video. On another rainy day, I came out with a drone and just to check on the progress. Those small square pier pads would eventually become a huge pain, but more on that later. Hey, that's my concrete truck. The truck you see there is called a pump truck. The concrete truck backs up to it and dumps all the concrete into the pump truck, while the pump truck uses a huge extendable boom to place the concrete wherever you wish. And the whole thing is remote controlled. Now, I made sure not to distract the guy with the remote too much. Okay, so the forms are all off, and you can see the beautiful concrete foundation walls. These square notches are to support the steel beams that will be placed later on during construction. I heard sometimes builders will either forget them or misplace them and have to cut out new notches with a concrete saw, so planing these out is a huge time saver. But can you also see those round concrete patties? Yeah, those are the pier pads, which are the footings for the posts that hold up the steel beams that will basically hold up the main floor of the house. Yeah, so those were supposed to be square pier pads, not round shaped. But you know, it was my first time building a house, so whatever. Typically, the next thing you would do on the foundation is the waterproofing. This basically means that wherever the concrete will get backfilled with dirt, specifically concrete for the livable space inside, there needs to be a waterproof barrier, and we went ahead and used a spray-on type. We also installed a drain tile system, which basically allows water, groundwater, to drain down by the foundation walls and eventually make its way out. Not too long later, the flatwork guy came out with me, and he placed the forms for the edge of the basement slab, meaning the walkout side of the basement. He also left part of the forms out so they could have a machine in and out to deliver gravel for the slab and also give the plumber the access that he needs. But before any of that could happen, we decided to install a temporary power pole to provide electricity at the house. The next steps would be to have the plumber do what's called rough plumbing, where they basically lay all the main pipes that would be under the basement slab. So one thing that really confused me about the plumbing was when you look at it just with your eyes, everything looks flat. I mean, obviously way over here, I can see there's a pretty good drop. But a lot of these other lines, they look horizontal to me. So I actually, not that I don't trust my plumber, but I took a level and I was like, what really is it? And then he kind of talked to me and explained to me that what they're typically looking for is about 1/8 of an inch of the bubble to stick out from the line in the middle of level. And that really is enough for them to have proper flow of, liquids and solids. If it's got too much incline, then apparently the water flows faster than the solids or something like that. And you don't want that because, the water helps push solid waste down the line. So yeah, even though it looks flat, it's actually to spec. So that little litter box over there is actually for a future tub shower. We just do that to protect the drain. It's covered, and then in the future when we're ready to finish, we'll dig it all out and have access to the drain. So here in the middle of nowhere is a future kitchen island, and when you have a future kitchen line, an island with a slab underneath, there's really no way to run plumbing to it after the slab is in. So you want to do everything ahead of time. This is why we have obviously the plumbing on that end connecting to the main, and also we have hot and cold running to the future kitchen faucet. The other thing you need for a kitchen island potentially and typically is power. And if you think about it, you've got a couple things. You've got a future dishwasher that needs its own ideally 20 amp breaker circuit, and then you have a garbage disposal that might be on there as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run 2 circuits into the kitchen island, and you know what, if I only need one in the future, that's fine, but I'll have 2 separate circuits available. In order to do that, you need to run a schedule 40 PVC pipe, whatever size that you need depending on the wire you're trying to stick into it, and run it out somewhere. In this case, this is going to be a future unfinished wall, and it's going to pop out from kind of where your future, if you finish it, your future base plate would be. The idea there is you take your base plate, you slot it, and let the electrical come out just like the water here, and it'll go into the stubs or the studs between the studs and then connect to your home run. So that's kind of the idea here. Super simple, but definitely want to plan ahead and take pictures because it's all going to be buried and disappear here very soon. And then we would fill in with gravel and start the radiant heat part of the project. But not really. Things were not going to be so smooth from here on out. Okay, so here I am driving with the loudest styrofoam piece ever. That's the radiant heat sheet. But remember a little bit ago I said we intentionally excavated lower so that the footings would be more exposed? Well, let me explain. My plumber took full advantage of the deep footings to basically start on the dirt and work his plumbing up from there. And the deal with plumbing under the slab is your highest point is limited by where the slab is. You know, you can't obviously put plumbing through the concrete. It has to be buried with gravel first, and then you pour your concrete over it. Well, since our footings were kind of deep and we had all that exposed area, I think what the plumber did is essentially started his way at the lowest point on the dirt and worked his way up. Well, that got really bad because it got in the way of my radiant heat insulation. So I called the plumber. I'm like, hey, I feel like the plumbing is too high. Like, I have to lower it by like 4 inches. And he's like, oh. And I was like, did I tell you that we were doing radiant heat and we were, doing the insulation in there? And he goes, yeah, I think you did. I'm like, okay, well, I think the whole thing needs to be lowered. Like, what does that look like? And he goes, well, it's probably a couple of days of work, whatever amount of money. I'm kind of busy right now. It might be a week or two before I can get back out there and lower it. And I'm like, okay. So I came home and I was like, no, this has got to be fixed. I can't be too mad about this at the plumber because I guess I didn't do a good enough job explaining the radiant heat situation to him. And when I was there, I should have reminded him more. At the same time, I wasn't going to wait 2 weeks and pay him to lower his plumbing job by 4 inches. So spent days out there in like brutal heat, just digging with the shovel and lowering the whole system. I'm not gonna lie, I became pretty good at properly sloping plumbing because I had to check everything. You lower one piece, that means the rest of it's got to be at the right slope. You can't just lower, because you'll have all these high spots, and that's not good for poop. So yeah, lesson learned there. Probably will never repeat that mistake again. Notice how the plumbing is now dug into the dirt instead of being elevated over the ground. Also, you might notice that I had marked out square cuts on the pier pads. I had told the foundation guy to come back out and cut them into squares per the plan dimensions, and thankfully he was totally okay with that. All of these challenges really started making us question whether or not radiant heat was going to be worth it. Think about it. We live in the Midwest where radiant heat is simply a luxury. It's not a necessity. I mean, let's be real. And so far it's causing us to spend days redoing plumbing, fixing pier pads, and who knows how much more additional work to get everything prepped for the radiant heat. And the other thing we didn't know is exactly how to form the walkout edge of the slab in order to prevent thermal bridging. So basically you have this whole part of the house that does not have a foundation wall and you have insulation. And it's like, okay, well, how do you cap the slab there with, you can't protrude your insulation out. How do you prevent thermal bridging to get into the slab, the edge of the slab, from sucking in the cold or the heat or whatever, if your insulation is only preventing heat transfer from down and up? And way after we built a house later on, I learned from a builder actually a pretty neat trick on how to solve that, but too little too late, maybe on the next house.